He grabbed the man by the collar before he even ran the scan. Behind that calm face was a chip that had already recorded the arrest, transmitted it to 3 different governments, and started a countdown that no badge, no union, and no excuse could stop. By the time the sun rose over New Atlantic City, Sergeant Rourke Halden would not just lose his job. He would lose every single thing he believed made him untouchable. The year is 2050. New Atlantic City rises out of the reclaimed shoreline like something dreamed up by a species that had finally stopped being afraid of the sky. Towers of woven carbon lattice climb 2,000 feet into the clouds, their surfaces alive with soft blue light that pulses in time with the traffic grid below. Flying vehicles drift between them in careful, invisible lanes, guided by an air traffic mind called Atlas that has not allowed a single mid-air collision in 11 years. Above it all, a ring of orbital relay satellites watches everything, all the time, and forgets nothing. This is a city that likes to believe it has moved past its oldest sins. The holographic billboards say so. The mayor says so in every address. The history museums say so, with their exhibits about the old injustices sealed safely behind glass, as though prejudice were an extinct species rather than something that simply learned to wear better technology. Down on the smart roads, self-driving delivery pods glide between towers in perfect silent formation, their routes calculated 11 moves ahead by an intelligence that has never once been distracted, never once been tired, never once let a bad night bleed into a bad decision. Above them, holographic ID scanners built into every intersection greet each vehicle with a soft chime and a flash of green light, confirming registration in less time than it takes a human eye to blink. It is, by almost every measure the city likes to publish in its glossy annual reports, the safest metropolis that has ever existed. But safety built on cameras and sensors has never been the same thing as justice, and New Atlantic City is about to be reminded, in the most public way possible, of exactly how wide that gap can still run, even in a century that thought it had engineered prejudice out of existence. It is nearly midnight when a sleek diplomatic cruiser, its hull the color of brushed obsidian, banks gently out of the high orbital lane and begins its descent toward the diplomatic quarter. Inside, alone except for the quiet hum of the autopilot, sits a man named Ambassador Elijah Cole Adebio. He is 54 years old, broad-shouldered, silver just beginning to touch his close-cropped hair. He wears the deep navy uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Authority, a small silver pin at his collar shaped like 2 interlocked rings, one for Earth, one for the Mars Compact. He has just spent 11 days at the Interplanetary Council's summit on the lunar colony of New Serenity, negotiating water rights for the 3rd Martian settlement. He is tired in the particular way that only comes from being the calmest person in a room full of people trying to start a war with paperwork. He grew up on the old coastal edge of a city that no longer exists under that name. The son of a marine engineer and a translator, and he still remembers with a clarity that never quite fades the particular exhaustion of being the only black student in rooms that assumed his presence needed explaining. He did not become a diplomat because he loved the theater of negotiation. He became one because he had learned, early and permanently, that the people who write the laws are the people who decide whose dignity gets protected by default, and whose has to be proven case by case, stop by stop, room by room. He had spent 30 years making sure the law, at least the law he could touch, no longer worked that way. Tonight, without knowing it yet, he is about to test whether the law he helped build can actually hold. He is also, though nothing about his posture would ever announce it, one of the most protected individuals on the planet. Sewn into the collar of his uniform beneath a small ceramic plate no larger than a coin is a quantum immunity chip, a device that does not merely identify him. It watches, it listens, it timestamps. And the moment anyone attempts to detain, restrain, or interfere with an accredited diplomat carrying one, it begins broadcasting a continuous, tamper-proof legal record to 4 separate government servers at once, none of which can be reached, deleted, or misplaced by anyone on the ground. Ambassador Adebio does not think about the chip. He has not had to think about it in 14 years of service. He assumes The way any reasonable person assumes the sun will rise, that his uniform, his credentials, and his obvious diplomatic vehicle will be entirely unremarkable to whoever might see him tonight. He is wrong. And in less than 11 minutes, that wrongness is going to detonate across every screen in the Western Hemisphere. 3 miles below and 2 sectors east, Sergeant Rourke Halden is having a bad night, and he has decided, as he often does, that the world owes him for it. Halden is 41, built like a man who spends more time in the gym than in the classroom, wrapped in matte black cyber armor that hums faintly with servo assistance. His patrol drone, a squat hovering unit designated Griffin 7, floats a few feet behind his left shoulder, its optical sensors sweeping the restricted smart lane he has been assigned to guard for the last 6 hours. He has written 4 citations tonight. None of them for anything more serious than a delivery drone drifting 2 feet out of its lane, and he is bored in the specific dangerous way that gives men like him permission to go looking for trouble instead of waiting for it to come to him. Beside him stands Officer Denise Acaffer, 26 years old, 11 months out of the academy, still new enough that the weight of her badge feels like something she has to prove rather than something she has already earned. She has spent the shift trying not to notice the way Halden talks about certain neighborhoods and certain types, the way his jaw tightens whenever a vehicle with tinted diplomatic plating passes overhead. She has told herself, the way rookies do, that she is imagining it. Tonight, she will stop being able to tell herself that. She had joined the force for reasons that had felt, at the academy, almost embarrassingly simple. She wanted to be the kind of officer her older brother never had, the kind who slowed a situation down instead of speeding it up. 11 months in, she has learned that wanting to be that officer and having the nerve to actually be her, in the moment it matters, in front of a superior who controls her every future assignment, are 2 very different things. She tells herself, standing on that rooftop pad, that tonight is not the night she will have to find out which kind she really is. She is wrong about that too. Got something, Halden says, and there is a note in his voice that Acaffer has learned to recognize, not caution, not procedure but appetite. Griffin 7 sensors have picked up the ambassador's cruiser as it eases into the final approach corridor for the diplomatic quarters private terminal, exactly where it is supposed to be, on exactly the route its flight plan specifies. The vehicle's transponder is broadcasting a clean diplomatic registration. The onboard traffic AI Atlas has already logged it, cross-checked it, and cleared it 3 separate times. None of that matters to Halden, because none of that is what he is looking at. He is looking at the shape of the man visible through the cruiser's forward canopy, and deciding, in the half-second it takes most people to blink, that the shape does not belong. That's not a diplomatic route, Halden says, which is a lie, and some small buried part of him knows it is a lie even as he says it. Sarge, the transponder's reading clean, Acaffer says carefully. Atlas cleared it. It's flagged diplomatic quarter priority. Transponders get spoofed, Halden says. Queue up an intercept. There is no rule that requires Officer Acaffer to obey an order that violates protocol. There is also no rule, in the unwritten and far more powerful code of a rookie's first year, that makes it easy to say no to the man who decides whether her next 90 days go smoothly or become a quiet campaign of small punishments. She keys the intercept sequence. Griffin 7 rises, angles its running lights to strobing red, and broadcasts a mandatory landing directive across every frequency the cruiser's autopilot is listening on. Ambassador Adebio feels the deceleration before he understands it. A soft chime. A red overlay blooming across the canopy glass. Mandatory intercept, local law enforcement. He does not panic. He has been detained before, in smaller ways, in earlier decades, in places that had not yet learned to dress their prejudice in servo armor and drone escorts. He knows, with the specific patience of a man who has made peace with how often he will have to prove things that should never need proving, exactly what to do. He brings the cruiser down onto the rooftop landing pad Griffin 7 designates, exactly where he is told, exactly how he is told, hands visible on the console the entire time. The canopy hisses open. Cold night air rolls in, carrying the ozone smell of the drone's hover engines. Sergeant Halden is already walking toward him before the canopy has fully retracted, one hand resting with theatrical looseness on the grip of a magnetic restraint baton. Out of the vehicle, hands where I can see them. Of course, officer. Adebio's voice is even, unhurried, the voice of a man who has spent a career learning that calm is not weakness. It is the only weapon they cannot take from you. He steps down onto the landing pad, hands open at his sides. May I ask the nature of the stop? Suspicious flight pattern in a restricted corridor. I flew the approved diplomatic corridor for the quarter. I'd be happy to show you my flight authorization. He moves his hand slowly, deliberately, toward the small panel at his collar. And this is the moment, this exact half-second, when everything Halden believes about the night could still be salvaged if only he chooses to look. He does not choose to look. A holographic panel blooms up from the ceramic plate at Adebio's collar, painting the air between them in soft blue light. A full diplomatic credential, his name, his rank, the seal of the Earth Diplomatic Authority, the seal of the Interplanetary Council, and beneath it all, in text that pulses gently to indicate its legal weight, the words full diplomatic immunity, Interplanetary Diplomatic Immunity, ACT Article 4. Halden looks at it the way a man looks at a card trick he has already decided is fake. Anybody can buy a hologram projector, he says. This credential is cryptographically signed by the Lunar Treaty Office and refreshes every 4 seconds against a live orbital registry, Adebio says, still calm, still patient. It cannot be forged. Your own patrol drone can verify it in under 2 seconds if you allow it to scan. Behind Halden, Griffin 7 sensor ring flickers, once, twice, already running exactly that scan, because that is what it is designed to do the instant a credential of this class is presented. A soft chime sounds from the drone speaker. Akaffer, standing a few feet back, sees the result bloom across her wrist display before Halden does, and feels something cold drop through her stomach. VERIFIED. Elijah C. ADBAYO, Ambassador, Earth Diplomatic Authority, Immunity Status. Active detention prohibited under Article 4. Sarge, she says quietly. It's real. The drone verified it. He's cleared. I don't care what the drone says. Halden's jaw is tight now, the appetite from earlier curdling into something uglier. Something that does not want to be told it was wrong in front of a rookie and a man he had already decided before either of them said a word deserved to be put in his place. I've seen fake diplomats before. Real slick ones too. Sergeant. Adebio's voice does not rise. If anything, it drops, gains weight, the way a held door gains weight the longer someone leans against it. I am asking you, formally and on record, to stand down. Under the Interplanetary Diplomatic Immunity Act, any detention of an accredited diplomat carrying an active immunity credential constitutes an actionable violation of interplanetary law. I would strongly advise you to consult your supervisor before proceeding. You threatening me? I am informing you. There is a difference, Sergeant, though I understand it may not always have been taught to you that way. Something flickers across Halden's face at that. Not shame, not yet, but the first hot sting of a man realizing that the person he has decided to intimidate is, in fact, several moves ahead of him and entirely unafraid to say so. He glances, almost involuntarily, at Akaffer, as if looking for an ally, and finds instead a young officer staring at her own wrist display, at the word VERIFIED still glowing there, unable to look her sergeant in the eye. Sarge, please, she tries again, quieter this time, the word please doing more work than she wants it to. We can call this in. Let dispatch confirm it before we do anything we can't undo. I am the dispatch tonight, Halden snaps, and it is perhaps the single most honest thing he says all evening. A man who has decided, long before this stop, that his own judgment outranks every system built specifically to check it. It is, perhaps, the calm itself that finally breaks something loose in Halden. The fact that this man will not shout, will not beg, will not shrink, will not perform the fear that Halden's whole career has quietly trained him to expect. And so Halden does what men like him have always done when calm refuses to become fear. He reaches for force instead. Turn around, hands behind your back. Sergeant Halden, Akaffer says, and there is real alarm in it now, you cannot turn around. Ambassador Adebio looks at him for one long moment, not with fear, not even with anger, but with something closer to sorrow, the specific sorrow of a man watching another man choose, with his eyes wide open, to destroy himself. Then, without a word, he turns around and places his hands behind his back. The magnetic restraints close around his wrists with a sharp mechanical snap, and the instant they engage, 3 separate systems begin recording in triplicate. Griffin 7's optical sensors, the smart cuff's own internal pressure-enforced logger. And silent unstoppable already 4 seconds into its broadcast. The quantum immunity chip at Adebio's collar, transmitting a live tamper-proof feed to the Earth Diplomatic Authority, the Lunar Treaty Office, the Interplanetary Council's legal registry, and the Federal Cyber Justice Bureau, all at once, all in real time. Sergeant Rourke Halden has just placed an accredited ambassador of the Interplanetary Council under illegal arrest, on camera, on the record, in front of a rookie who will later testify to every word of it. And he has no idea, not yet, that the countdown has already started. The restraints tighten a fraction harder than procedure allows, and a small amber light along their inner edge blinks once, twice, the smart cuff's force sensor logging excessive pressure, timestamping it, attaching it permanently to Halden's badge number. "That's excessive restraint pressure, Sarge," Akefer says. "The cuffs are flagging it." "Then they're malfunctioning," Halden snaps, and shoves Adebio forward toward the drone-escorted transport pod waiting at the edge of the pad. Adebio does not stumble. He walks with the same unhurried dignity he has carried his entire life into the pod. Down through the city's lower transit corridor, into the gleaming white intake bay of the 14th Precinct. A building whose walls are, unbeknownst to Halden, about to become the site of the most consequential 30 minutes of his career. The booking wall is a vast curved surface of light-reactive glass that greets every detainee with a full biometric scan before an officer even has to touch a terminal. As Halden marches Adebio toward it, muttering something to the night shift booking officer about impersonating a diplomat resisting a lawful stop, the wall does what it always does. It scans. For half a second nothing happens. Then the entire surface of the booking wall floods red, and a klaxon tone, not loud but unmistakable, a tone every officer in that precinct has been trained since day one to fear, rolls through the intake bay. Red-level diplomatic crisis alert. Detainee: Elijah C. Adebayo. Status: active diplomatic immunity. Detaining officer: SGT. RHALDEN badge 4471. Violation: Article 4, Interplanetary Diplomatic Immunity ACT. Automatic notification sent to Earth Diplomatic Authority / Federal Cyber Justice Bureau, Office of the Police Commissioner. The night shift booking officer, a heavy-set man named Gutierrez who has seen every kind of chaos a precinct can produce, goes very still and very pale. "Halden," he says slowly, "who exactly did you bring me?" Halden's mouth opens, and for the first time all night, nothing comes out of it. Within 4 minutes, the precinct's watch commander is awake and in the building. Within 9 minutes, 2 black federal transport vehicles descend onto the precinct's rooftop pad, and 4 agents in the dark gray coats of the Federal Cyber Justice Bureau move through the building with the calm, unstoppable efficiency of people who have done this before and will do it again. The lead agent, a compact, silver-haired woman named Director Priya Ansari, does not raise her voice once. She does not need to. She simply holds up a small credential of her own dark blue instead of diplomatic navy. And every officer in that intake bay who has spent a career assuming the chain of command ends at their own precinct door learns in real time exactly how much larger that chain actually is. "I need every device Sergeant Halden has touched tonight isolated and preserved," she says. "I need the smart cuff logs, the drone feed, and the bodycam footage pulled before anyone gets the idea to be helpful and clean anything up." She looks briefly at the frozen booking wall still glowing red behind her. "And someone please get the ambassador a chair that isn't bolted to an interrogation floor." Within 14 minutes, every terminal in the precinct that Halden has ever logged into freezes simultaneously, replaced with a single message: "Network access suspended pending investigation." Halden stands in the middle of his own precinct, badge still on his chest, and watches his entire professional world lock him out in real time. Ambassador Adebio, meanwhile, sits, still restrained, though the cuffs have been quietly deactivated by a federal agent the moment she arrived, in a small, clean interview room, and for the first time all night, allows himself the faintest trace of something that is not quite a smile. He is not thinking about revenge. He has never had much use for it. He is thinking about the last line of a lecture he once gave, years ago, to a class of young diplomatic attachés on the lunar campus. The most dangerous weapon a just system can hand you is not a gun. It is patience, wired directly into the truth, so that the truth cannot be talked out of what it saw. Legal attaché Naomi Vance arrives 11 minutes later, having been alerted by the same automatic broadcast that woke half the Earth diplomatic authority's night staff. She is sharp-eyed, precise, dressed even at this hour in the crisp charcoal suit of someone who does not intend to lose a single procedural inch of ground tonight. She does not raise her voice. She does not need to. She simply sits across from the ambassador, reviews the incoming data feed from the quantum immunity chip on a small tablet, and says, quietly, "We have 4 independent, tamper-proof recordings of an unlawful detention, an excessive force flag from the restraint system, and a documented refusal to honor a verified credential. This is, without exaggeration, one of the cleanest Article 4 violations I have seen in 9 years. I imagine Sergeant Halden does not yet understand what that means," Adebio says. "He's about to." She lays out in the plain, unhurried language of someone who has explained this exact chain of consequence many times before exactly what the next 72 hours will look like. A mandatory red-level review by the Federal Cyber Justice Bureau, an automatic referral to the Global Civil Rights Tribunal. And because the immunity chip's broadcast had gone out live unfiltered to 4 separate registries, the moment the cuffs engaged. A public incident record that no department spokesperson, no union lawyer, and no city press office would have any legal way to soften. "Do you want to press for the maximum available sanction?" she asks. "Full termination, referral for criminal negligence, the works. You would be well within your rights." Adebio considers this for a long moment, turning his wrist slowly, feeling the last faint ache where the restraints had sat too tight for too long. "I want the truth on the record in public, where it cannot be quietly filed away the way his last 6 complaints apparently were," he says finally. "What happens to him afterward should depend on what the truth actually shows, not on what I feel like doing to him tonight while I am still angry enough to enjoy it." Vance allows herself the smallest flicker of a smile. "That," she says, "is precisely why they made you an ambassador and not a prosecutor." By 6 in the morning, the story has already begun to spread, not through any leak, not through any reporter's hustle, but through the simple, unstoppable fact that the Federal Cyber Justice Bureau's automated crisis notification had by law also gone to the city's Office of Public Accountability, and the Office of Public Accountability's own transparency protocols require that any red-level diplomatic crisis alert be logged to the Public Incident Registry within 6 hours. By 7, the holographic morning news towers above Liberty Plaza are already looping the raw drone footage. The wide, patient, dignified face of Ambassador Adebio standing on that rooftop pad while a police sergeant screams at him to turn around. There is no editorializing needed. The footage does the work by itself. By 8, an emergency session has been called at City Hall, and it is there, in a wood-paneled chamber that has hosted 100 smaller scandals over the decades, that the last of Sergeant Rourke Halden's career is about to be dismantled in full public view. Mayor Loretta Vance Ibrahim, no relation to the ambassadors, attaché, a coincidence the local papers will spend a full news cycle being delighted by, sits at the center of the long table flanked by Police Commissioner Daniel Osai and a visibly uncomfortable union representative named Bill Kratz, who has clearly been given this assignment by someone who did not like him very much. The public gallery behind them is already full, though the session was called with barely 2 hours' notice. Word travels fast in a city wired the way New Atlantic City is wired, and by the time the mayor's gavel sounds, 3 separate HoloNews crews have set up feeds along the back wall, their floating camera drones politely keeping to the airspace the Sergeant-at-Arms has designated for them. Ambassador Adebio sits, calm as ever at the opposite end at Hachet Vance beside him, a small drone hovering discreetly at the corner of the room, ready to project the evidence the moment it is called for. "Let's begin," the mayor says, "with the footage." The holographic reveal blooms up from the center of the table. Not grainy, not distant, but crystal-clear timestamped, 4 synchronized angles running side by side. Griffin 7's optical feed, the Smart Cuffs Force log, rendered as a bright red spike on a graph, the quantum immunity chip's continuous broadcast. And Officer Okafor's own bodycam which, it turns out, she never once deactivated, not even when Halden off to the side and out of what he thought was frame muttered the words that would end him. "I don't care what color badge he's carrying. He's still just another one of them acting like he owns the sky." The chamber goes very quiet. Commissioner Ose closes his eyes for a moment, as though he can feel, physically, the weight of what is about to happen to his department's public trust. Kratz, the union representative, tries gamely and briefly to argue that the footage lacks context, that Halden was following his training, that the smart cuff flag might be a sensor calibration issue, and is cut off gently but completely by Hachet Vance sliding a second document across the table, Sergeant Halden's internal complaint file. 14 prior citizen complaints over 9 years. 6 specifically alleging racially biased stops. 3 previously resolved, with nothing more than a note in a file no one outside the department had ever been permitted to see. The pattern, Vance says quietly, was not hidden. It was simply never looked at. Kratz has nothing left to say. It is the rookie, Officer Denise Okafor, who is asked to speak next, and it is here that the story finds the moment its audience will remember longest. She stands, hands trembling slightly, and does not read from notes. "I knew it was wrong the second he called the intercept," she says. "I knew the transponder was clean. I knew Atlas had already cleared the flight path. I told him. I told him twice. And I still followed the order, because I was 26 years old and I was more afraid of my sergeant's opinion of me than I was of doing the wrong thing to a man who had done nothing." She pauses, looks not at the mayor, not at the commissioner, but directly across the table at Ambassador Adebio. "I am sorry, sir. I should have refused the order the moment I saw the verification come back clean. That failure is mine and I will carry it. But I am telling the truth about it today because you never once stopped being calm, even when none of us deserved it. That is the only reason I found the courage to say any of this out loud." Ambassador Adebio looks at her for a long moment, and something in his expression softens. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the first quiet acknowledgement that this young woman, unlike the man beside her, still has time to become someone worth trusting. "Courage delayed," he says, "is still courage, Officer Okafor. What matters is that you found it before this room made you wait any longer. What happens to Sergeant Rourke Halden happens quickly, publicly, and without the shield he spent a career assuming would always be there." The commissioner does not wait for a formal hearing to take the first, symbolic step. He nods once to the federal agent standing at the chamber's rear door, and a biometric deactivation command is issued on the spot. The same kind of command that, hours earlier, had frozen every terminal Halden had ever touched. Halden's badge, standing on a small pedestal at the evidence table where it had been placed that morning, dims from its usual gold to a lifeless gray. It is, in its own quiet mechanical way, more damning than any speech the mayor could have given. "Sergeant Halden," Commissioner Osai says, "you are relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending a full review by the Global Civil Rights Tribunal and the Federal Cyber Justice Bureau. Your service weapon, cyber armor, and all department access credentials are to be surrendered before you leave this building." Halden, who has spent the entire hearing with his jaw locked and his eyes fixed somewhere just past the mayor's shoulder, finally speaks, and what comes out is not an apology, but the last gasp of the same arrogance that put him in this chamber in the first place. "You're going to destroy my career over a bad read in bad lighting." "No, Sergeant," Ambassador Adebio says, and this is the only moment all morning that his voice carries any real edge to it, quiet as it still is. "I am not destroying anything. 4 independent recording systems captured, without editorializing and without malice, exactly what you chose to do, and exactly what you chose to say while you believed no one who mattered was listening. You did this. The truth simply refused to disappear the way you assumed it would. The room is silent enough to hear the soft hydraulic hiss of the chamber's doors as 2 federal agents step forward to escort Halden out. Not in restraints, not yet, though the Global Civil Rights Tribunal's own investigation opening within the hour will determine over the following weeks that his prior, resolved, complaints deserve a far harder second look, and that the word resolved had for 9 years been doing a great deal of quiet, dishonest work. In the weeks that follow, the story becomes something larger than the rooftop where it began. The Global Civil Rights Tribunal reopens all 14 of Halden's prior complaints, and this time, nothing is filed away unread. 2 other officers, emboldened by Akafer's testimony, come forward with their own accounts of stops they had quietly worried about for years but never reported. The Federal Cyber Justice Bureau's audit of the precinct's SmartCuff and bodycam data reveals a pattern the department had never bothered, or never wanted to look for. Officers whose resolved complaint files nonetheless correlated year after year, with force sensor spikes on Black and Martian colonial detainees far above department averages. The Department of Interplanetary Affairs, invoking the incident directly by name in its published findings, moves to close the very loophole that had let those older complaints go quietly unexamined for so long. From now on, any excessive force flag generated by certified restraint hardware must be independently reviewed within 72 hours by an officer outside the accused's own chain of command, with the results made available on request to the Global Civil Rights Tribunal. Commentators call it, a little grandly, the Adebyo Standard. The ambassador himself, when asked about the name in a brief statement to the HoloPress, says only that he would have preferred it be named for Officer Akafer, since it was her voice, not his silence, that finally moved someone to write it down. The Interplanetary Council uses the case as the founding precedent for a new addendum to the Diplomatic Immunity Act, one that closes the very loophole Halden had tried in his last desperate minutes of authority to exploit. Officers may no longer claim ignorance of a credential's validity as a defense once an AI verification system has confirmed it in the field. The addendum passes with a speed that surprises even its own sponsors, and legal scholars will spend the following decade citing the rooftop of the 14th Precinct as the moment interplanetary law finally caught up with interplanetary technology. Sergeant Rourke Halden's case moves through the Global Civil Rights Tribunal over the following months, with a thoroughness his old department had never once applied to the complaints filed against him. The tribunal ultimately finds him responsible not merely for the single unlawful detention that made him famous, but for a documented pattern stretching back years, a pattern that had simply never survived long enough in any prior review to be called what it was. His termination is upheld. His case is referred onward for further review by the Federal Cyber Justice Bureau, and whatever becomes of him after that, the city he once policed no longer particularly wonders, because it has, for the first time in a long time, other things to be proud of. Officer Denise Akafer is offered and accepts a transfer to the department's newly formed AI Ethics and Accountability Division, not as a punishment and not quite as a reward, but as the kind of second chance that only means something because she asked for it honestly in public, at real cost to herself. 2 years later, she will be the one training incoming rookies on exactly the moment she failed to act quickly enough on that rooftop, using her own case, unflinchingly, as the primary example. And Ambassador Elijah Cole Adebyo returns, 11 days later, to the high, quiet chamber of the Interplanetary Council on the lunar colony of New Serenity, where the water rights negotiations he had left unfinished are waiting for him precisely where he left them. He takes his seat. He opens his files. He does not mention the arrest once during the session, because that is not what today is for. It is only afterward, alone on the observation deck, looking out through reinforced glass at the pale curve of the Earth hanging silent and blue against the dark, that he allows himself to think about it at all. He thinks about the half-second before the cuffs closed, when Sergeant Halden could still have looked at the truth instead of past it. He thinks about Officer Okafor's trembling voice in that chamber, choosing, finally, to be braver than her fear. He thinks about how very little of what happened that night depended on him raising his voice, and how very much of it depended on a system, finally built well enough that his silence and his patience and his calm refusal to become smaller than he was turned out to be enough. He thinks, too, about his father long since passed, who had once told him, on an old coastal boardwalk, in a much smaller and much angrier century, that the law will only ever protect the people it is written to see. His father had said it as a warning. Elijah has spent his entire career trying to turn it into a promise instead, that if he could not change every heart wearing a badge, he could at least help build the kind of system that no longer needed those hearts to be good in order for justice to still arrive on time. Tonight, for the first time, he lets himself believe the promise held. Below him, unseen from this height, the lights of 100 cities not so different from New Atlantic are still burning, still watching, still recording, cameras and satellites and quantum chips doing exactly what they were built to do. But he knows, better than almost anyone alive, that none of it would have mattered without one frightened young officer choosing, in a room full of people who did not want to hear it, to tell the truth anyway. Machines can keep a record forever. Only a person can decide in the one moment that counts to let that record actually mean something. He turns from the window at last, and for the briefest moment, permits himself something he rarely allows in public. A small, private smile, not of triumph, but of quiet, hard-won relief. Somewhere behind him, the negotiations he came here to finish are waiting, patient as ever, exactly the way the world had once assumed he would always have to be. In the end, it was never really about a badge, or a rooftop, or a set of magnetic restraints closing half a second too soon. It was about what happens in the moment a system is finally built strong enough that the truth no longer needs anyone's permission to survive the night. Machines recorded it. Law protected it. But it was a frightened young officer choosing, at last, to say it out loud in a room full of people who did not want to hear it, that turned a recording into justice. Technology can preserve the truth forever. It still takes a human being willing to risk something to carry it into the light. If you believe that no badge, no algorithm, and no chain of command should ever be allowed to outrank the truth, like this video, subscribe for more stories like it. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Officer Okafor's place in the 60 seconds before it was too late to say no?